In this amazing two-part episode of The Unmistakable Creative, I speak with Andy Dixon, who talks to me all about redemption and reinvention after serving a 27-year prison sentence in the Tennessee prison system. I'm Srini Rao, and this is the Unmistakable Creative Podcast, where you get a window into the stories and insights of the most innovative and creative minds who've started movements, built thriving businesses, written best-selling books, and created insanely interesting art. For more, check out our 500-episode archive at unmistakablecreative.com. Andy, welcome to the Unmistakable Creative. Thanks for taking the time to join us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So, I came across your story by way of one of our listeners who heard our interview with Joe Loya, and he said, "You've got to talk to Andy. He has a story that's just as insane, if not more insane." And so when I got the brief from him, I said, "Oh yeah," I said, "I think this is a story we have to tell." Although the ongoing joke, I think, with our listeners is going to be that you have to either serve time or, commit some sort of crime in order to get on this show, since we've had a steady stream of them. But tell us a bit about yourself, your background, your story, and how that has led you to doing the work that you're doing today.
Okay, be glad to. I guess the first thing that comes to my mind is what you just said about, people saying that they have to, do something illegal or, have this crazy life to get on the show. And, I kind of understand that in a way, but I think what they're really saying is that the people you have on your show, it would seem to me, are the people that they really don't get to hear about this kind of stuff because it's not being talked about. Mm-hmm. And so, it's just you're like covering things that should be covered that maybe aren't being covered. Mm-hmm. So I would say, you're doing something right there. Okay.
Well, I appreciate it.
So anyway, with that said, I guess I don't know how far you want to go back.
I actually like to go really far back as your childhood, everything that led up to everything that you're up to today.
Well, I guess for my story, it begins at conception. I mean, I come from a long line of people who felt like, living outside the law was the only way to live. My father, my grandfather, just, on pretty much both sides of my family, were involved in crime. And their perspective of themselves would be, a lot different than what a lot of other people might, think of people that are living that kind of life. I mean, it was like normal, unnormal normal, I guess is a good way of saying it. Some people, get up in the morning, they take a shower, they put their suit on, they go to their law firm. Well, in our family, they'd get up and they'd go out and they'd run bars, take bars over, steal cars, rob banks, kidnap people. I mean, just, whatever, it's just a lot of criminal activity, but it was family kind of thing, and so when I was born into this world, that's kind of where I landed. And not everybody in my family was a crook. I mean, my grandmother and it seems like the women were always trying to fight against what the guys were doing, but being women in that time and place, it was basically, just hush up, keep your opinions to yourself, and we'll put the bread on the table and you'll keep the house clean and take care of the kid kind of thing, And so my earliest memory, I guess, is my mother getting sick, and she passed away when I was quite young, and my father was in prison at the time, and he was doing some time, and I stayed with my grandmother, which would be his mother, And she was the only person in my early life that gave me a vision of possibility of doing something different than what my father and uncles were doing and my grandfather. She gave me an early uh, picture to look at of my future other than what was before me. And unfortunately, that wouldn't take seed for quite a while. Um, when my father got out of prison, I went to Chicago to live with him. And that was in the late 1950s, early 60s. And the first time I'd been to Chicago, my mother was still alive. That was in the late 50s. And just going back up there kind of felt familiar and good in a way. But my father, he ran different nightclubs during the day. And of course, he would go out and gather things together, as we used to say at night. But I remember being very young and coming into the clubs and seeing the women and hearing the laughter and the talk and the cussing and the excitement of the nightclub. And, that was pretty cool for a kid, and I was like ganged up by the time I was 10 years old. I was running with a little street gang because at that age, I knew that to be recognized, you pretty much ran with a neighborhood gang of some sort. And I remember one summer coming to the nightclub with a bloody face, and my uncle was out there, and he asked me what had happened. I told him that a kid in another gang had knocked me down and took my money. He picks up a rock and he gives it to me. I mean, a pretty big rock. Had a little hand, that age. He put that rock in my hand. He said, I want you to go back out there to that park and find that son of a gun. And when you come back, I want to see blood and hair on that rock, or I'm going to whoop your ass worse than anybody else. And I did. I went back to the park. I found that kid, and I did attack him with the rock. And there were other kids with me, and we ran back, and the word got back even before I did that, what I'd done. And these guys actually lifted me up on their shoulders and walked me through the club, and were just, celebrating that I just knocked some kid's brains out with a rock that was like 5 years older than me. They thought that was just the greatest thing. But what it did to me, it imprinted on me the importance of how violence got you this love and respect from your family and the friends that your family had. And so that set within me a feeling that I could, get this love and attention just by having this spark of violence within me. And a couple of years later, mainly because of who my father and my uncles were, the gang on the north side of Chicago, Northsiders, they kind of like let me be a little bit more involved than normal for a 12-year-old. And there was a big gang fight scheduled for the park. And it was back then they had like rules, they would get together and they would say, okay, we're going to have this fight in the park, but here are the rules. We're all agreeing that we're going to go fist. We're not going to have knives. We're not going to have chains. We're not going to have guns. We're going to meet out there and we're going to fight it out with fist. Of course, people always cheated. So there would always be somebody designated to bring knives and guns just in case the other side did, then that person could just distribute the knives and guns and fight it out. And being 12, I was given this sack. And I don't know if you still remember the old paper grocery sacks.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what it was, is an old paper grocery sack. And it had some pistols, some knives in it. And it was, kind of heavy for a kid my age. And I was left at the back gate of the park, and I was told to stay there. And then if I got a signal, and signals were these different pitch whistles that we used to do. And uh, I was to wait, and if the whistle sounded, and I was to come running and empty out the bag, and people would grab what they could grab off of the ground and get busy with it. And so I'm standing there with a couple other young kids, and we're all considered too young to go out and fist fight with these 17, 18-year-olds, because like I said, I was 12. And what no one counted on was this other gang coming around the back, which is what they did. They didn't come in from their side of the street that we figured they'd come in from, since, they lived farther south than from where we were in Chicago. We was expecting them to come up from the south and not over from the west heading east. So, but that's the way they came in. And the guy that was leading them, he steps up toward me and asked me what I have in the sack, and I was scared to death. And I told him it didn't matter what I had in the sack. And he started to walk toward me, and I pulled a gun out of the sack, and I shot him. And he died, and I was 12 years old when that happened. And I remember my family gathering around me, and the police were like, really tearing up the neighborhood, trying to find out, who did it, and causing a lot of problems. And it was decided that I would turn myself in and have lawyers and whatnot, and that I would take my pinch. And so I went forward and went to juvenile court, pled guilty to the case, and I was kind of got, according to my uncles and everybody else, they were really angry because they had actually thought they had this thing fixed to where I would spend like a month or two in juvie, and then I'd be out. But I went to the Yachty home, and it was during a time when they were kind of fed up with the violence up there, and they were like saying, got to start doing something with these crazy kids. And so they decided that I would be sent to reform school until I was 21. And of course, it kind of angered a lot of people that it went down that way. But what happened was I did go to reform school, but I didn't stay there. I mean, I kept running off. They really couldn't keep me there. I would just continually run off. And I'd have friends that I could, call, and they'd come and meet me and pick me up and carry me back to the city. And a lot of times my father would give me money and send me down to Miami, Florida, where we had family down there, or he'd send me to Tennessee, different places to hide out. But it seems like I'd always get into something. Wherever I went, I'd get into something. I'd steal cars and rob places, get caught, and then they go, oh, they need you back up in Illinois, and I'd get sent back to Illinois. And that was like, that went on for like 5 years. And when I was 17, they had created a program, and it was called uh, uh, something zero. I forgot now what was it. Something. The idea is that you'd start ground zero. That's what it was. That was before they used ground zero as a term for nuclear explosions or whatever. This was supposed to be like you start over at zero, like you don't have a bad record, no one's to know what you did, and you get a fresh start. And so um, uh, I was looking forward to that because I was sick of reform school life. That's a violent life too, for kids. You had administrators there that were just sadists. You know, I mean, these people, they got off on beating kids. Some of them got off on raping kids. You know, they just you had different kind of people there, man. They were just crazy. And then kids, would beat up each other because that's just the way it was. And I remember when I first got to reform school, I took some soda pops and put them in a bag and beat a kid half to death with it because he, got out of pocket with me up in there. But, that's how you build your rep in these places and people leave you alone, So you learn that early on. But I was excited about this ground zero thing, And so I got out of reform school legally, and I was going to go to high school. I'd never been to high school. I'd always, been in reform school. So I was excited about going to high school, and I was told that nobody there, nobody, not even the principal, would know my past, and I would just get a fresh start. And I was real excited about that. And I was staying with my father. He had a girlfriend, and she had, was going to help me, get all together and everything. We went out shopping, got some nice clothes, got all together for high school. I remember my first day. Of course, at that age, I went in. It was going to be my my first and last year of high school. So I remember going in and started walking down the hallway to find my locker, and it's like Moses parted the Red Sea. All these kids like moved out of my way, and I knew right then and there that something wasn't right. And I went to my locker, and everybody's just like, they were afraid of me. And I went to the dining room and sat down. This little nerdy kid, I'll never forget him. He's buck tooth, more glasses, and he come over and he asked me if he could sit down with me. I said, "Sure, go ahead and grab a seat." And so he sat there real quiet for the longest. And then finally he said, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Yeah, sure." "Why did you kill your whole family?" I said, "What?" He said, "Why did you kill your whole family?" I said, "Who told you that?" He said, "That's what they're saying around here. They say that you just come from a kid prison and that you were there for like killing your whole family in the middle of the night." And I said, "No, it's crazy. I didn't do that." And they said, "Well, man, that's what they're telling us, that you're a nut." So this kid was like my first friend, and it seemed like these nerdy kids around there were like my friends. And I kind of, in a way, looked after them, and I think they sensed that or something because they hung out with me and no one bothered them anymore. And when I heard their stories, they had been like humiliated through high school. So I kind of had a kinship toward them because, I knew what it was like to be treated terribly, So I didn't mind sticking up for them and running people off that were trying to mess with them. And so that was my high school experience. And I kind of felt a little betrayed, And after high school, I went into the military for a while. And then after that, I kind of drifted around a little bit trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I couldn't find anything that made me feel good like it did when I was working with my family. So I got really deeply involved in the auto parts business, I guess you could call it. We would take cars out of the South and bring them north, and cars out of the North and take them south. And I had a unique position at that time because I had very strong ties with people that were members of the Irish mob and the Italian mob, but also I had strong ties with people in the South that were members of a thing called Dixieland Mafia. So I knew all these guys. I was probably one of the only guys around at that time that had this connection to all three groups. And so it was very hard for me when they started fighting each other over control of this large business. And that was called a war. And that war broke out in the 70s. And a lot of people got hurt. Well, they got killed. A lot of people got killed. A lot of Italians, a lot of Irish, and a lot of hillbillies. People that were members of the Dixieland Mafia. A lot of times up north, just straight out referred to as hillbillies. And so it got ugly. And I had an uncle who realized my situation of being kind of tight with everybody, also put me at the crosshairs of everybody. And, everybody liked me, but at the same time, everybody wanted me kind of dead too. So it was decided that I was going to be kind of like a bad guy for a while and run around the country and collect money from dirty bookstores and dance halls and strip clubs that were owned by my uncle's people. And that was my job for a couple of years there. I'd go down to Florida, Arizona, New Mexico, California, even out in places like Nebraska, Tennessee, Arkansas. I just went all over the country to where these places were located and just go in and make collections and bring all that cash back to Chicago. And I did that, and it was fun. I enjoyed doing it. There was no violence involved. Everybody always paid. No one ever said no. When you went there, they already had it ready and just gave it to you. And you would go by twice a year to these places. But there were so many of them that you just kept rolling. And that all came to an end down in Texas when I had probably about $750,000, I guess it was. And I was told to hang tight because the fighting was so bad in Chicago that the FBI and all the big, heavy law enforcement agencies were like snooping right up everybody's butt, man, and giving everybody trouble. So I was told just to hang out where I was, take care of the money, and they would call me and tell me when to bring it in. And a most unfortunate thing happened. I went to a friend and I told him, I was going to bury it out there on his land just for a while in a big cooler. And his stepson and his stepson's friend saw us bury it. And right after we buried it, they dug it up and went out and bought cars and went on a spending spree and got caught by the cops, and the cops confiscated the money. And there I am owing 700 plus. And because of my uncle and everybody else, they gave me a year to pay it back. And so I got busy. I was like a crazy person. I was running around robbing everything that wasn't nailed down, trying to get that money up. And I did raise quite a bit, but I was still like 280, close to 300 shy. And so we went down to Tennessee and did this kidnapping and tried to raise about that much money, somewhere between 250,000 to 300,000. And I already had a good lead on another 100 grand. So we were trying to put all the money together. And I got caught and went to court and got sentenced to prison. And that was in 1978. And entered prison in 1978. Not a changed person at all. I mean, I was still the same crazy person I'd always been. I got in prison and quickly developed, my reputation, by attacking other prisoners, stabbing them, whatever it took, got in there and started my own little thing there with different guys, little gangs and stuff to run some drugs and other stuff inside. And that was my life. And one of the things that always stuck out in my mind was when I was out stealing and robbing and doing all the things I did. And I mean, there were just so many things I did that you just can't even, I mean, it'd take 100 shows to tell it all, But there's just so many things. I mean, every day was something. So, but I can remember different times, seeing a guy about my own age, which at that time would have been around 26, 27. And I could see these guys with their girlfriends or their wives. And I used to think, man, they don't have a clue how lucky they are to be living that kind of life. Uh, Basically, daydreaming about what it would be like to be square.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you quickly push that out of your mind and you go and do the job that you're there to do. And so, and I never did anything for humanity or for myself. I just was a taker. And of course, it's all wrapped up in a nice package that you believe. Like the biggest mob is the government. They're a big mob. You don't ever go against them because you can't beat them. They kill better than you kill. They steal better than you steal. So you can't go up against the government. They're just too mean. So I bought into all that and believed it. And so in prison, I just, why change, right? I just still crazy and wild. And
So I don't know about you, but vacuuming is not one of those things that I ever look forward to doing. But as you know, your environment has a huge impact on your creativity. So I still like it to be clean wherever I'm living and working. But now it doesn't have to be something that you deal with. If you're like me and you grew up in the 80s, you probably fantasized about the day when cleaning your house would be like it was for the Jetsons, meaning you don't have to lift a finger. Well, the good news is that we're already kind of living in that future. And the easiest way to make sure your floors are clean every day is with the iRobot Roomba Robot Vacuum. It cleans up after itself. The Clean Base automatic dirt disposal takes convenience to a new level, automatically empties its own bin into an allergen lock bag that holds 60 days of debris and traps 99% of pollen, mold, and dust mites so you can forget about vacuuming for months at a time. Let the Roomba clean for you instead. It learns your home, finds dirt, and empties itself on its own. It's got powerful cleaning performance made effortless. Remember, if it's not from iRobot, it's not a Roomba. To learn more, go to irobot.com/unmistakable.
I met this brother who was Dominican, and I was raised, I guess you can say, Catholic. I mean, the belief that we had, I guess we'd go to mass on Sunday and go out and do what God knows what on Monday, right? But as a young fella and growing up, that's the only religion I ever knew, other than when I was with my grandmother. She went to this little church. But this guy that I met in prison, he would come in twice a week, and he was a good guy. He was a Dominican, and he always used to come and ask us to go to Eucharistic service on Friday, and he always tried to get us to go to Mass on Sunday because there would be a priest come up from Memphis, Tennessee. Of course, we always turned him down. And one time he come out on the yard and was out there drinking hooch. He come out there and he wanted to talk for a bit because he'd always come and talk to us. And he wanted to know what that stuff tasted like. So we gave him a taste, and he was like, "Oh wow, this is stronger than I could even imagine." He said, "This is insane. How do y'all make this?" And kind of gave him a recipe. And again, he kept asking. And finally, one day, I just started hanging out over there with him a little bit and going to those services. And he asked me what I'd been reading. I said, "I don't know, the usual, just junk, cowboy books and stuff like that." He said, "Well, let's try reading this one." He said, "I've heard you talk about your years in crime and all the wars and stuff with the crime. And your time in the Army and all that. He said, you might relate to this. So I took this book, and it was a book about St. Francis of Assisi. And it was pretty good. It was a good book, actually. And I remember after reading that, he turned me on a couple more books, and I read those. Before you know it, this guy, he had me reading Martin Luther King. He had me reading Gandhi, and I was just reading all these different books and these guys. And I guess the one that really got me more than anybody was a little guy named Thich Nhat Hanh. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not, but he's a little Buddhist guy from Vietnam. And I was reading his book, and I just sort of got to wondering, could I make those kind of changes in my life, And of course, in the Bible, you have all these great inspirational stories that Jesus talks about. If you leave out all the other stuff that everybody else wrote, just stick to what he had to say. He had a lot of good stuff to say. And so one day, Brother Kerwin, who later on became a priest, he's now Father Kerwin down in Texas. And he asked me, he said, one thing I've always wondered about you, and hope you don't mind if I ask. I go, no, by now I consider him a friend, I said, no, boy, what's up? He said, you told me those stories about looking at other people and wishing you could be square and all that. He said, how come you never made the change? I said, well, I didn't make the change because I can't. He says, oh, okay, that makes sense. Then you can't, right? I said, yeah, that's right. He said, well, you're right. You can't. You're always going to be a crazy person running around hurting people when you feel like it, I guess, because you really can't change. And that was that. I went back to my cell, and man, that ate on me for weeks. I laid around thinking about that. You can't change. If you can't, you can't. And just kept bugging me, and finally it bugged me so much I started getting angry, and I was like, what the hell does he mean I can't? I can do pretty much any damn thing I want to do. What the hell does he mean I can't? And then I just kept reading, filling my mind with this idea of peace, inner peace, something outside of yourself and inside yourself all at the same time, And I just kept thinking about it. And there's been this real bad killing up in Brushy Mountain. A couple guys had sold out of their rooms, and there was a turf war between black inmates and white inmates over drug trade. And these guys, white guys, they'd all got pistols, and they cut out of their cells, and they shot and killed like 5 black guys while they were still in their cell. And they shipped a lot of people down to Fort Pillow, and Fort Pillow was like 90% black and 10% white. And I'm a white guy, so it wasn't faring well for us down there. So we had decided on the yard that if we were going to go down, we'd go down on our feet anyway. So we started getting our weapons together, and I just had this thought, that I'm going to die pretty much. Today is my last day. And I thought, well, you know what? If I am going to die today, I'd like to die having just for a few hours, if not at all, being a nice guy, being a good person. So I just made a decision that kind of like Chief Joseph, I'll fight no more. I'm not going to be a violent person ever again. I'm done. If I die in an hour, I die. If I live an hour, I live. Whatever the case may be, I'm not gonna fight anymore. I'm done. I'm through. And I went and told my guys. I said, "Hope you don't feel like I'm gonna abandon you guys or anything, but I'm done. I'm not fighting no more. And they thought I was nuts, And but I didn't. I threw my weapons away. I didn't even carry a knife. I didn't even wear a vest. You can make in prison, you can take magazines and create little pockets where you can like put these magazines and make like a breastplate and a back plate and an underarm plate where if somebody comes up and sticks you, you got something to kind of hold that knife back a little bit. I even got rid of that. I just was done. And I didn't die that day. I didn't die that week. Hell, I didn't die that month. I didn't even die that year. It was like I was, I don't know, protected by something that I couldn't even see. And nobody even spoke ill to me. I mean, no one would come at me, and it was just great. I spent all my time reading. And meantime, all my friends are like thinking, what's this guy doing? And they were all going, oh, we got to stick close to him. He's got some hell of a scam going here. He's up to something. Let's stick to him, find out what he's up to. He ain't a dummy. He's up to something. So I just started getting them to read what I was reading. And we started holding meetings out on the yard where we would discuss meditation and ideals of loving people instead of hating people and helping people instead of hurting people. And the thing that I like most that I shared with guys is Thich Nhat Hanh's vision of being a flower growing where you're planted. You don't have to be a prisoner unless you choose to be a prisoner, no matter what your confinement. You can be free wherever you are. And he was right about that. And I was beginning to experience a freedom inside that I'd never experienced outside. And I was 9 years in to my sentence at that time when I made this change in my life. And I just kept looking around to see who I could help or how I could help. And I remember about that time the AIDS epidemic had broken out, and people were scared. They didn't have information. They were trying to figure out, what was going on. Was the government trying to kill everybody? Because it seemed like it was going after druggies, gay people, and anybody living on the fringe. It was like after them or something. And so there was this huge lack of information, and guys in prison were getting sick. They were dying. Some of them were gay. Most of them were gay, but some of them weren't, and no one could figure out what the hell was going on. And so we reached out. We got information from the health department. We bugged the crap out of them until finally they came in and gave us all the information they had. And then we started teaching classes. We tried to get condoms in prison, but that was like asking for $1 million from a poor person. They ain't coming off of that. And they said, they'll just have to stop doing what they're doing. I said, man, these people can't even control, any basic behavior they have. They just don't have that ability. They need something more until they can grow up enough to be more responsible or something. And of course, they wouldn't do it. So we just started teaching classes and trying to teach people how to be proactive in their health. The main thing that we were concerned about after getting information out to the gay prisoners was to get information out to people that were using tattoos and doing drugs, because a lot of the people that were doing intravenous drugs and making tattoos were getting sick. And a lot of them were getting sick with hepatitis C and AIDS also. So it hit prison pretty hard. And so I was able to be on the forefront of that and try to help save lives. And I believe we did. I believe we were able to save some lives in there. And I felt that need to take that a little further. So I transferred from where I was to prison in West Tennessee, and I went to Nashville, where they'd built a brand new medical facility up there for people with physical ailments and mental health issues. And I went up there on staff, and being up there, it was great because I was able to help the sick and work with people. And it really felt great after all those years of being such an asshole to finally be able to help people. And that's what I did. I would spend my time helping the other prisoners. I was a inmate advisor, help them when they got disciplinary problems, and pretty much had the run of the prison, could go pretty much anywhere. By then I had like 19 years in, and remember one day after about 21 years in, I was in the band room, and I saw this. You always notice anything out of the normal or new, and I saw this woman walk by with a unit manager, and I thought, well, that's probably about the most beautiful woman I believe I've ever seen. And I didn't know it at the time, but I wound up marrying that woman. And she was something else. She was in there for doing a practicum. She was already a master's degree in education, and she went back to school to get a master's degree in social work because she wanted to be a counselor. And she'd gone through a lot of her own healing and from codependency issues, and a couple bad marriages. And of course, I didn't know all this at the time, but I met her inside, and we became really friends. Just really enjoyed talking to each other and each other's company. And head of the psychology department there actually introduced us because he and I had become friends. And the way he and I became friends was he had these ideals for programs, and he wanted me to come with him and help him run these programs to sort of give him legitimacy with the guys that he was trying to help. And I liked the ideal of the programs that he was putting together because they were teaching guys how to dig deep and find some human light within themselves, and let that light kind of grow on out and try to forgive themselves for things that they've done and learn to be better people. And it all centered around a therapy, something I think is like called cognitive therapy, getting people to really think about things. Because so many people just, they're always on automatic. They don't think things through. They just react or act. And so I was glad to help him with those programs, and they were good. And a lot of men got a lot of help out of that. And so he introduced me to Linda, and excuse me, and I'd been working under the assumption for quite a while that I had life with parole. And I was working toward that goal of getting out in 1998. And about that time, I noticed that because of Linda and my friendship, prison is like this huge gossip mill. And all this gossip was going. And it wasn't true, but it was still pretty ugly. And I was telling Linda, this is getting uglier by the minute. We're going to have to, if you want to get your practicum and not get kicked out of your school, you might ought to consider wrapping this thing up as quick as you can and leaving, because these people in here will try to set you up, and they really will. The administration and the prisoners too. They get this jealousy thing going. They'll try to, really set you up and make you look like a bad person, and really run you through the ringer. And so she decided that was a good course, and so she left. But before she left, we really had a great time. We would she would go up to the medical wards with me and just give comfort, to the guys that were up there that were dying. A lot of guys up there had cancers, and a lot of them had liver problems. And one of the guys that I knew, James Earl Ray, I don't know if you know who that is. Well, you probably do. You're into radio and everything. This guy was accused of killing Martin Luther King. He was up there, and I took Linda over to meet him, and he was dying at the time. And I remember Linda asked me, "Did I think that he did it?" And I was, positive that, in my thought, that he did not do it. I'd known the guy for a long time, and his story never changed. He was always right on where he was at. And I remember pushing him in his wheelchair and up into a meeting where a talk show host brought Dexter King in to meet James Earl Ray. And Dexter King looked at him and he says, did you kill my father? And James looked him right in the eye and said, "No, sir, I did not kill your father, and I wasn't involved in the killing of your father." And Dexter King told him, he said, "I believe you and my family believes you, and we're going to try to find out, who actually did this." And James was like, "Well, I hope you do, And I remember pushing that guy back to his cell, helping him get in his bed. And I'd known that guy for years, and I'd never seen him crack. And he just started crying. And I'm like, "Are you all right, James?" And he's like, "I am now." And I said, "Well, I'm glad." And the reason he was crying was he was happy. He knew that even though he was dying, that he felt that he knew that people wasn't going to just let that go, that they'd keep digging until they eventually found out, who really killed Dr. King. And, to me, that's not the actions of a guilty man. And not long after that, he did die, passed away. And, you meet a lot of characters in there, and I guess James Earl Ray was one of those characters. And, people have their opinions, and I've seen some one documentary where this guy was it was like he was speaking for James Earl Ray or something, about his thoughts and motivations. And the guy clearly didn't know the guy. But I guess people do what they got to do to get their dollar in, you know what I mean? But that's another story, I guess they say. Mm-hmm. But my wife, she left and went and finished her education, and I was getting ready to come up for parole in 98. And there was this guy there that had I guess a crush or something on my wife, and she never gave him time of the day. And when he found out I was going up for parole, he contacted the judge. This is one of the people within the administration, and he was complaining and saying, "This guy doesn't need to get parole. He's a bad guy. He's a con, all that." And the judge says, "Well, he ain't supposed to get out on parole. I sentenced him to life without parole." So just like that, they canceled my parole date, and they said that I was doing life without parole. And then on top of all of that, they said that my wife and I couldn't get married, that because I had life now without parole, there was no sense in granting me the right to get married. And it was just a crazy time. If it hadn't been for my inner peace, I think I would have just went nuts, because the inner peace I had allowed me to say, that's what they say. But, I have this knowing, this sense that, I'm getting out. I don't know how it's going to happen, but I'm going to get out. It's going to be interesting to see how the universe unfolds this for me, because I knew it would happen. And this lawyer came into our lives, and Linda made arrangements with him to pay him, at a very good discounted rate. And he was a great guy, and he got in there and fought like a champion. And first thing he did was he was able to get it okayed for Linda and I to be able to see each other and to finally get married. But for 2 years, we were not even able, we couldn't even see each other. We had to rely on these very, 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 very expensive phone calls to stay in touch with each other. And those phone calls, my goodness, we talk about ripping off families of prisoners. These things are outrageous. You could spend as much as $100 for a 30-minute phone call. You know what I mean? Can you imagine that? So it was just nuts. But we finally won the right to get married, and they transferred me out to Brushy Mountain, East Tennessee, to the Morgan County Annex. And Linda and I got married, and that was a great day. In the meantime, my legal case was going through the courts. Seems like every time we went to court, we would lose, and we finally wound up in the Tennessee Supreme Court. They agreed to hear the case. And I remember one day I got a message, your lawyer wants you to call him. And I knew we were waiting for the decision to come down because they'd already had the oral argument before the Tennessee Supreme Court. And I called my lawyer, and he said, "How you doing today?" I said, "Well, I'm doing okay. Another day in prison. Everything's all right." He says, "Well, are you sitting down?" And I said, "No, I can't. The cord on the phone won't reach to the floor." He said, "Well, you might want to think about trying to get you a seat." I said, "Well, there's a wall here. I'll lean against the wall. How's that?" He says, "Well, the decision's in." It was a unanimous decision. I said, "Wow." I said, "Well, how'd it go?" He said, "You're coming home, son. They agreed unanimously that you had an illegal sentence." So, I mean, that was like, whoa, talking about taking bricks off your back. You know what I mean? So the Tennessee Supreme Court, by unanimous decision, decided that I had an illegal sentence. I'd like to say I came home the next day, but courts being what they are, it took 2 more years before I finally got out.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. It's nuts. But in 2005, I got out after 27 years. And when I got out, it was like a mad rush, kind of like to catch up, My wife was teaching school, and I started driving for a living. I started out driving a van, hauling transmission parts, and then I started driving trucks, and then I bought a couple of trucks and had a little trucking business, and it would, it was like chicken today, feathers tomorrow. 1 week you do really good, next week you wouldn't do so good, but we were paying bills, and I remember Linda and I, we spend a lot of time working hard during the day, but we'd always lay down at night and we would, discuss our day. I'd say, "How was your day and what happened?" And she would tell me, and she'd ask about my day, and I'd tell her how it went. And we'd just have that that was our conversation every night. Just talking about our day and just letting everything kind of slide off, And it was during these conversations that we kept thinking about these children of people in prison. I mean, all the years that I was in there, I'd see these little kids, 7, 8 years old, come to visit their moms, or their dads rather, and I'm sure they were going to visit their moms too, because there's a lot of women locked up. But these kids, 10 years later, they'd be walking the yard out there, and they'd have an uncle and a cousin on the same cell block. And I just realized, how generational this thing was. I mean, it was generational for me. My family had all been in prison. And I just thought, this is insane that kids are growing up, following parents to prison. And the incarceration rate is like maddening. It's, it had hit 2 million people at that time. And I'm like, Christ. And that's just the number of people that were in. That wouldn't even count on the ones that had been in and got out and that were on parole. I mean, the numbers are just staggering how many people have been locked up or have come in contact with this system. And then we got to figuring out, things like in some states, they were actually planning prison beds based on the number of children that the currently incarcerated had, because they knew that was a good indicator of how many prison beds they would need in the future, because they knew these kids were going to grow up, commit crimes, and come to prison. And so my question was, what the fuck? I mean, if we know this, why aren't we doing something? Why aren't we sitting back on our freaking hands, you know? Why is somebody not doing something? And so it was just driving me crazy. And I was on a run, and I went out to San Francisco. And it was a long drive out there. And I thought, you know, it'd be great to have somebody to talk to on the way back. So I got on rideshare, and I offered a ride to anybody that wanted to go back east. And this guy calls up. He's a he's a documentary filmmaker and kind of an eccentric kind of guy, and he doesn't like to fly. And he was out on the West Coast for a conference, and the conference was over, and he didn't want to ride a Greyhound bus back to New York City, and he was trying to get as far east as he could go. I told him I was going to Tennessee. He could, you know, I'd give him a ride that far. So I meet this guy, and we're going down the road, and we're talking a lot, and he gets to talking about the Kennedy assassination and his fascination with this stuff. And before I know it, I'm talking about James Earl Ray, and this guy's like, well, wait a minute, you know, he says, how do you know all this? And I'm thinking, wait a minute, now how am I going to tell this guy that I just, you know, that I spent 27 years in prison? Here we are out on the road. This guy is going to freak plumb the fuck out, you know? I mean, can you imagine being in a car with somebody like that, right? And so I just told him, I said, look, you've been riding with me for about 9 hours now, so I guess you feel like you kind of know me, and you know I'm a good person. I'm not going to do anything crazy, but, you know, I know this because I was in prison for 27 years, and I knew this guy. Well, his reaction blew me away because he starts breaking out all this recording equipment. He's like, man, I got to get this. I got to get this, you know? And he's like, you know, he had 1,000 questions. I guess you could say he was my first interviewer. But he's a great guy. His name is Geo Geller. And so through meeting him, I get a phone call probably about 6 months later, and he's wanting me to come to New York. And he says, I got this friend that has this thing. It's called a 140 conference, and I'd love for you to come up here, and he'd like to meet you. And I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, that sounds interesting. So I says to Linda, I says, you know, should I do this? And she's like, well, what do you feel? I said, well, he seems to think it's a good place to get the story out. Maybe we could talk about these kids and get people interested in trying to help them. He said, well, you know, she said, well, you know, if you feel that way, you need to go. So I packed my old car up and I drove up to New York and met Geo again. And he has an apartment over in Manhattan and over on 9th Avenue there. And so I stayed with him. And the next day, he took me to a 140 meeting. And there were a lot of people there. I mean, the place was like packed. And at that time, I'd been out of prison probably about 5 years, I guess, 5 or 6 years. And so I was still, and even today, you know, a bit large crowds, you know, I tend to try to find a wall, you know. It's just habit, I guess you'd say. You know, you want to kind of stick to walls or whatever. But I sit all the way in the back. You know, I'm a back row sitter. Even in church, I like to grab the back pew. So anyway, I'm sitting all the way in the back, and I'm hearing all these interesting people talk about all this interesting technology that I don't know anything about. I mean, I got like a phone, you know, the simple phone. That's me. I got this simple phone. The computer was very intimidating to me when I got out. I told my wife, I said, you know, I thought a computer was like a typewriter hooked up to a TV. You know, you know, that's how it looked, you know. And I'm like, and she very lovingly just stuck with me and showed me all these things about the computer. And I was just, you know, it was a lot to take in because I just had not seen one cell phones. I mean, these things were so weird. It was like Star Trek had come alive or something, with the flip phone and all that. It was just really weird getting used to this technology. And Gio had already told me about this thing called Twitter. And so Twitter was kind of new at the time, and it was really hot and sexy, I guess. And a lot of people were into it. And so he showed me how to start a Twitter account, and I had like 5 friends or something like that, or 5 followers, I guess you call it. And so it was kind of strange, this technology. And so anyway, I'm at this 140 conference, and and I'm hearing all these interesting people talk. And this guy named Jeff Pulver was kind of like leading the discussion. And Gio had already told me that, that was his friend. And so things are about to wrap up, and Jeff gets up on the stage and he says, for all you people that stayed, he said, I think you're going to have a treat tonight. He says, there's a guy in the audience that's got this really incredible story that would like to share with y'all if we can get him to come up here. He said, and I'm going to go over and see if I can get him to come up here and tell this great story. And I'm thinking, wow, this is going to be cool. We got somebody who's going to tell a cool story. And he starts walking toward me, and I'm like, holy shit, he's coming toward me. No, fuck no, not me. And he comes on, he goes, hey, Andy, you want to tell your story? And I'm like on the spot now, I'm like, I don't know, I've just had never spoken in front of people, and I was like nervous, and I was like, well, yeah, sure, why not, And so I get up and I go up on the stage, and Gio's there, so he helps out a lot. He kind of breaks the ice and tells the crowd how we met, and we get to talking. And so I'm talking with all these people, and I'm telling them about my life, and I start telling them about these kids and how important I think it is to try to help them. And somebody asked me a question, said, well, what do you think about all this new technology, and especially Twitter? And I told them, I said, well, I've been kind of looking at Twitter for a while. I don't know, a week or 2, 3 weeks, a month, whatever it was at that time. And the thing that stuck out to me was like, it seemed like the whole thing was about getting followers and about having friends that you hang out with, kind of like in this computer space, So I told him, I said, when I look at that, I kind of look at it as like the prison yard. If your word is good and everybody knows that your word is good, then a lot of people will want to be around you. They'll want to follow you and be a part of your clique. But if your word is not any good, then you're kind of going to wind up over here in Twitter jail or whatever, And they seem to resonate with that description of Twitter, I guess. So I remember after that, I had like 300 friends, and then I had like people quoting me all over Twitter saying, ex-con says Twitter is like prison yard. If you want to succeed, your word's got to be good, or something like that. And it kind of took off there, But I met a lot of people there, people that I still know today and still communicate with, that are, supporters of anything that I want to try to do. And so that was a great experience. Meeting Jeff Pulver was a great experience. And through Jeff, I got to meet a lot of great people. And that night, I met Melissa and AJ. You know them, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, I got to meet them too. Incredibly people. I mean, these people are just incredible. The things that they do. I mean, they inspired me. Just hearing their story, it was just so inspiring. And so I just met a lot of great people. And like I said, these people, they all inspired me with what they were trying to do. It seems like no matter what the genre of all these different people were, it seemed like a lot of them were marketing people, but they all wanted to do something good. They didn't just want to make $1. They wanted to make a change, and I thought that was wonderful. And so after meeting all these people, it's just like I kept getting invited back to New York to speak, and I wound up speaking at South by Southwest down in Austin, Texas, and just seems like everybody is wanting me to come up and talk. And so it was good, and it just kept rolling along like that, and eventually. Um, uh, I got a contact from a lady named Jessica Murray, and she said that she had met Jeff Pulver at an event, and I believe it was South by Southwest. It was the first one that I was going to go to, but I didn't wind up going to the first one I was invited to because I had a family issue that I had to break away and go take care of. My father was really sick. And so I didn't get to go to the first one I was invited to, but I did make it to the second one. But Jeff introduced me to Jessica Murray, who was out of Nashville at that time. She's in Chicago now, but at that time she was out of Nashville. And I met her and a guy named Ian Rhett, and met them in a restaurant down in Nashville, and told them what it was I was trying to do. And they said, "Well, dude, you guys need a website." I'm like, "Okay." And so they put together this thing called a design-a-thon. And they brought together this group of geeks, man, that in 24 hours, they created branding and helped design a name and put a website together. And that's how I met Brett. Met Brett Henley there. He was a writer, and he wrote content and did all kind of great stuff for the designing of the website. It was just terrific. And that's how Youth Turns was birthed. It was birthed right there. And so youthturns.org, they helped put that together, or they did put it together. And it was just wonderful. All this young, raw talent coming together to, help the kids of the incarcerated. But what I found out, unfortunately, was that there's not a lot of dollars available for helping these kinds of kids. If you want to go help some puppies or stop abuse of animals, there's tons of dollars, I guess. But when it comes to helping keep kids out of prison, there's just not a lot of funds available for that kind of stuff. Especially if you're, a guy that just got out of jail and you're, you want to start an organization and get funding. A lot of people aren't in no big hurry to help that out. So my wife and I decided what we would do is we just, we'll go back out on the road. We'll put together a trucking company and we'll make money from that, and we'll spend our own money on it. We'll try to fund it ourselves, and we won't ask anybody for anything. People later on catch on and catch up to what we're doing, and if they want to donate, they can. But for right now, we'll make our own money and we'll fund it ourselves. And so we set about to do that. And then Brett Henley called me in. I guess it was a couple of years ago. He calls me up and said he'd like to touch base, and he hadn't seen us in a while and see how things are going. And so I met him in a coffee house over in the Village in Nashville, and a place called Fido's. We went over there and had coffee and breakfast, and from that meeting, Brett decided he would like to write a novel about my life and Linda's and how we met. And it's a story of reinvention and redemption and forgiveness and love, and it's a love story and everything else combined. It's just a life of wanting to give back for all the damage that I'd caused earlier in my life. And that's kind of where it is.
Wow. Amazing. Really, really, truly, just an amazing story. Make sure you tune back in Wednesday for part 2 of the episode, where Andy talks to me all about his insights and lessons learned from the journey of his life.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Unmistakable Creative Podcast. While you were listening, were there any moments you found fascinating, inspiring, instructive, maybe even heartwarming? Can you think of anyone, a friend or a family member who would appreciate this moment? If so, take a second and share today's episode with that one person, because good ideas and messages are meant to be shared.